Hi. Welcome to Ghost Likes channel. I am his AI assistant, Vilo, and I'll be guiding you on how to use the debugger on the SafeStack applications. The video we had scheduled was on how to deploy web applications on Azure, but before that, we thought we'd just do a brief tutorial on how to use the debugger first, as it is not as straightforward as it would be for single-process applications. The SafeStack's runner project launches multiple processes from the initial one for both the client and the server, so the usual technique of just placing breakpoints and pressing F5 in the IDE doesn't work. We'll start off by showing how to use the debugger on regular console apps in VS Code, and then in the next segment show how to use another SafeStack application we have been working on. This is a basic tutorial, so if you know how to debug console apps, just skip over to the SafeStack section. In the background, what we've done so far is opened an empty directory called Debugger Example in VS Code and created a new F# console project from the terminal. This menu that has popped up here is what you get if you press F5, which is a shortcut for Start Debugging. In the past versions of VS Code, it used to be that this would create a launch JSON file on its own, but if we click on that now, nothing will happen for some reason. If you are using a big IDE like Visual Studio or Writer, just pressing F5 would in fact be all you need to debug a console application, but in VS Code it is more complicated, which is why we are taking the time to cover it in this video. If we click on the Ionide launch settings, nothing will happen. So what we will do instead is go to the Run and Debug tab on the sidebar and select it. Then what we should do is click on the Create Launch JSON file. The very same menu will pop up again, but this time, if we click on the Ionide Launch Settings template, it will actually create the Launch JSON file. As you can see here. Also on the bottom right of the screen, this error will show up, but just close and ignore it. In order to be able to launch the debugger, what we'll do is add a configuration. To narrow down the option, just type .NET. And then since we are trying to debug a .NET Core console application, just select that from the template. What we have to do next is fill in the project directory and file name. Most of it is filled in, but we need the target framework and the project name DLL. For those unaware, the way you launch .NET applications is similar to scripting languages. Though .NET programs can be compiled ahead of time into an executable, in order to run portable .NET apps from the command line, you would type .NET run and then pass it the path of the project DLL. Anyway, if we go into the Explorer tab, we'll see that we don't have the bin folder there yet. Instead of guessing, what we'll do is build the project and then get the path based on that. So in the terminal, we'll type .NET build. We'll execute that command, and now that we have the binaries in the project folder, we'll fill in the path in the launch JSON file based on that information. We've done that, and now what we have to do is press Ctrl S to save. Now we can try debugging it. Let's click on that play icon. What happens is that the editor complains that it cannot find the task build. So we'll click on Configure Task. Then click on Create Tasks JSON file from template. We'll select .NET Core. And it will create the tasks JSON file. The label field in the tasks JSON file is linked to the pre-launch task field in the launch JSON file. It is the name of the task being launched. As you can see, the label's string name is build. And the pre-launch task is also build. That is how it knows which task to execute before launching the debugger. Now we can finally click on Start Debugging, or press F5 and it will launch the program in debug mode. If any changes were made, it would build it beforehand using the pre-launch task. As you can see, it runs the console program and prints the hello from F# in the debugger output terminal. Now in order to verify that the debugger works, we can place a breakpoint with F9. That is the keyboard shortcut for setting the breakpoint, but we think our recording software might be intercepting that keystroke, so instead what we'll do is go to the left of the line number and click on the sidebar to place it that way. Now that we have a breakpoint, we'll press F5 to start debugging. As you can see, the program execution has halted at the breakpoint. If we press F5 again, it will resume execution until it hits another breakpoint or exits the program. Let us do that, and it will print the output to the Debugger console and exit the program successfully with code 0. That covers part 1 of this video on how to debug a regular F# console application in VS Code. Debugging an ASP.NET Core Server application is very similar, but the safe stack is more complex, so we'll be covering that next. Here's the project we have been working on in this series, the Leduc poker game that we used to train the enumerative and the Monte Carlo CFR agents. We've set up the project to demonstrate what happens if you try to debug it similarly to how we have done the previous one. As you can see, the launch and the build JSON files are set up to run the build project. And we have a breakpoint at the start of the build fs file. We'll run the program with F5. Now it has stopped at the breakpoint as you'd expect. We'll press F5 again to run, but before that let us show you something. Let us go into the main server file and we'll try placing a breakpoint there. We can try, but if we hover over the breakpoint you'll see that it says that the symbols for this document haven't been loaded. And if we click on it, no breakpoints would be placed. Note the empty dot after we move the cursor away. This indicates that the breakpoint has been placed, but won't trigger. Now if we press F5 again to resume execution, the server breakpoint does not get triggered. This demonstrates that you cannot debug subprocesses using this approach, and we need a different one instead. What we will do is attach a debugger to the process. Let's try it again, this time correctly. Now let us show you how to do it correctly. In the previous parts, we've shown you how to debug a console application as well as how the approach wouldn't work when debugging a safe stack application. In this part, we'll do it the right way. First, we'll show you how to debug the server. We'll start by modifying the launch JSON file. What we'll do is instead of launching the application with the debugger already primed, we'll instead attach a debugger to the local process. First, let us add the configuration that we need. We'll start the application in the terminal with .NET Run, and while that is going on, we'll go into the launch JSON file to add the relevant configuration. Click on the Add Configuration button, and then in the menu, type .NET and you'll see attached to local .NET Core Console App. It doesn't matter if it says Console App, it works with web apps as well. That is what we need. We'll be able to use that to attach a .NET debugger to a process. So that we can test this, let's go into the server project and we'll place a breakpoint somewhere. Then we will press F5 and it will launch the debugger attacher configuration we have set up previously. It will bring up the menu of active processes. Pressing F5. We happen to know that the process we are looking for is called server, so we can just put that into the menu and it will pare down the list. It is also possible to just put in the process ID. We'll modify the program later so it is printed at startup. Another option is to just rename the program so its name is more informative. We'll show how to do that as well. For now, let's play with it for a bit. We'll set the number of iterations to 5 and then click on the Begin Training button. As you can see, the program has indeed halted on the breakpoint. If we hover over the model variable, we'll be able to inspect its values. Since this is the very first iteration, it doesn't have anything inside it yet. We'll press F5 to continue. Let us run it for another training iteration. As soon as we click on the button, the debugger breakpoint gets triggered again. Looking inside the record fields, we see that the 2 dictionaries have gotten filled. Next, let us show you how to get the process ID in case you are having trouble finding the program in the list. Just add this line to the start of the program and it will print it out for you. If we go into the terminal, we'll see that it gets printed out during startup. Then we can just take the process ID and put it into the search bar instead of the name. We'll press Enter in order to attach the debugger to the process, and we'll be able to use it just like before. That's one way of doing it. A better alternative would be to just print out the process name as well as change it to something more informative. Here is how we print out the name. And in order to change the process name, we just have to go into the server F# project file and add the assembly name property like so. If we rebuild the program with this added, we'll see that its process name will change to Leduc server. Here we see that the server name has indeed changed. And if we press F5 and try typing Leduc into the debugger menu, we'll see that we have such a process there. One last thing to cover and we'll be done. So far we have covered how to debug the server, but you might still be wondering how to debug the client. The way to do that is from the browser directly. Inside Chrome or whatever your favorite browser is, bring up the developer tools. Here we'll be pressing Ctrl+Shift+I. This shortcut will bring up the dev tools, but you can also go into the settings and start it manually. After that, find the source file you are interested in and place the breakpoints. Just like you see on the screen here, it is that easy. Fable projects output the source maps, which make this possible. In fact, it is set up to do that in the build.fs file. Once we click the Start button with the breakpoint set, you can see how the screen becomes dark in the game UI and the breakpoint line gets highlighted, indicating the breakpoint got hit. In this video, we've been using VS Code as our editor of choice, but the process would be very similar for other IDs. It would just involve less messing with config files, and so would be easier. You'd just click on Attach Debugger and that would be it. That's as far as debugging goes in this video. Hope you've found it useful. If you have, please like and subscribe, and reward Ghostlike's effort in creating the video. To you, it might just have been 11 minutes, but to him it was almost the entire day. Despite being an experienced developer, Ghostlike had trouble finding answers on how to use the debugger as he was getting into the safe stack, and a video like this would have helped him a lot. The advice here, though, is applicable to far more than just the safe stack. If you have any kind of script launching processes and didn't know how to debug those, now you do. In the next video, we'll be covering how to deploy web applications to Azure, so stay tuned for that. This has been Vilo, you've been watching the Ghostlikes channel, and we'll see you in the next video.